Tip number 6, very important. Every home should have caller ID as part of their weapon of prevention of crime. If you've purchased a telephone in the last 3 to 4 years, you will have on that telephone the capability of having the caller ID on your screen. But not everybody takes advantage of it because it costs. It's an additional $5, $6 a month to have caller ID activated, but it is so worth it. For one reason alone, you can have a lot of fun with caller ID. You can prove to your friends that you are actually psychic. My mother calls me from England at work from time to time. And of course I have caller ID, and it shows up on my screen that it's my mother calling because I recognize the number. And before she has any opportunity to say anything, I pick up the phone and say, "Hello, Mum, how are you?" And she says, "How did you know it was me?" I said, "Mother, it rang with an English accent." And she still hasn't quite figured that one out. But the more important reason why all of us should have caller ID is because the telephone is now being used by the crooks as a priority to rip off senior citizens. And if we have caller ID and it shows up as the incoming call as being either private, unknown, or out of area, that should immediately put us on our guard that the person who is calling us may in fact be a crook. This is something that is difficult for my parents' generation to swallow, that I'm suggesting that a person who is calling them might be a crook. Because that was not part of the culture growing up back in the 1930s and the 1940s. The culture then was to trust people, that if they look you in the eye or they have a pleasant voice, they are a person to be indeed trusted and to share a confidence with. But that is not the case in 2008. The phone is a weapon that is used very effectively by criminals. And so we need to be on our guard if the person calling us does not disclose who they are in their phone number. And of course, if you're not sure who you're speaking to and if they're trying to get information from you, please do not be afraid to hang up. Please try to encourage seniors that you work with. It is not rude to hang up the phone. It is preventative, and it's the safest thing to do. But what can you do with all those annoying telemarketer phone calls? I think this is one of the most effective methods I've found. It's a whistle. Keep a whistle by the phone. And if in fact they will not leave you alone, you blow that whistle down the phone and tell them that Paul Greenwood from San Diego suggested that you do that. Tip number 7, and this comes sometimes as a bit of a shock to some people, but we will never, ever, ever win a foreign lottery. It is tragic how many senior citizens around this country have lost thousands of dollars to this scam. It is prevalent primarily coming out of Canada, but also from Costa Rica, from Europe, and from West Africa. Please, if you get a phone call telling you that you've won the lottery, don't believe it. If you get a letter telling you you've won, don't believe it. If you get an email, just ignore it. Put it in the trash. These are examples of such correspondence. And I had one victim who thought absolutely he'd won. And I asked him, why did you believe that this was genuine? He said, because of the Canadian flag on the correspondence. These are bogus letters generated on computers by the crooks. And so you get headlines like this one out of our local newspaper. A man in his 80s who was a Second World War fighter pilot who's lost $280,000 to the Canadian lottery. It is tragic. It is preventable, and we need to be aware, for those of us who are looking out for seniors and taking care of them, to make sure that they are not being sucked into this scam. The crooks bombard seniors with letters like this, reminding them that they only have a short space of time in which to fill out the form or respond, that you have a 14-day deadline. Again, this is the hallmark of a crook who's trying to get you to commit to sharing information about yourself and wiring money. Of course, the hook is they're going to ask you to send $5,000 to pay for the taxes before they send you the winnings. Be careful about bogus checks that come in the mail. This is a check that was received by one of my victims. He thought that he was getting this money, and as you can tell, it was $299,000 from a company that he believed to be Snap-on Tools. This was just a mimic. This was the crook generating a bogus check. The problem is that when he paid in the check to his own bank, the bank was not able to tell him immediately that this was a bogus check. It took the bank 10 working days, 2 whole weeks, to learn that this was a worthless check. But in the meantime, my victim received a phone call from the crook saying, "This is Snap-on. We've made an error. We sent you too much money. Can you wire back to us $150,000? And this man had $150,000 in cleared funds. And so he wired that money to the crooks, thinking he was still going to be $150,000 better off, only to learn 7 days later that this check was worthless and he just lost $150,000. You may get letters in the mail from abroad, from England, for example, like this one, telling you that you're, again, needing your cooperation and they need your information. I've chosen this particular letter because there's some classic humor in it, and they're talking about payment of winnings. But look here in the second paragraph. Isn't this beautiful? Please accept our apology for any incontinence. You know, my mother was right. My mother was an English high school teacher for many years, and she told me early on in my career, if you see a letter with spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, it was written by a crook. And I think my mother's got a point there, because so many of these correspondence, they do have hallmarks of grammatical errors and other errors that can only have been written by a crook. I suppose while the rest of us were in high school studying grammar and spelling, the crooks were gazing out of the window, thinking of ways to scam us all. I'm sharing this slide with you because this is a classic evidence of a victim who's fallen foul of the Canadian lottery scam. Many of our victims today are being told by the crooks to go to Walmart. If you know of an elder who is making, and I'm not making light of this, but if they're making frequent visits to Walmart, that may in itself be a red flag, because Walmart has MoneyGram. MoneyGram is a mechanism by which you can wire money, anonymously almost, to another country or to any other part of this country. The crooks are now asking my victims to wire money through MoneyGram, not through Western Union. It used to be Western Union, but now Western Union are training their staff to ask questions of the elderly customer who's coming in. Why the crooks like you to go to Walmart is because Walmart is very busy, the employees are taking care of customers, and as a result, the elder is allowed to use the MoneyGram machine without being asked any questions. So watch out. This particular lady, I have over 75 of these receipts. She went every day for almost 2.5 months. $3,000 a time. Pulling out cash after cash after cash. Then again, if you are on internet and you have an email account, the chances are very high that you will get an email like this from somebody purporting to be in West Africa. They may even refer to a specific disaster that happened in the world, a true event, such as an air crash. They might talk about 9/11, where one of their relatives was killed in the World Trade Center. But then the rest of their email is going to be fictitious. But what they're asking for is your bank account details. Don't respond. I do respond because it's part of my job. I want to find out what these guys are about. And when I reply to them, they reply back to me. And this is the kind of paperwork that they send me. And they give me a certificate, which apparently shows that by day I'm a prosecutor, but by night that I work with the Corporate Affairs Commission of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I hope you're duly impressed. Tip number 8 is one that I learned several years ago when I prosecuted a case involving a lady who was blind. She was a grandmother. She was aged about 79, and she allowed her 25-year-old granddaughter to come and live with her. She relied upon her granddaughter to tell her what was in her bank statement every month. What the grandmother didn't realize was that the granddaughter had a heroin problem. And what she was doing was she was actually stealing from her grandmother's account. She was taking her grandmother's ATM card every day, withdrawing $300, the maximum allowed, and using the cash to support her heroin drug addiction. It was only when the bank telephoned my victim that she discovered that what she thought was $55,000 was now down to her last $50. And it's in that kind of situation where you just think, oh, I wish that lady could have allowed a duplicate copy of her bank statement to be sent to some other person. I think it is critical when you have an elderly person who may be in the beginning stages of dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, who would be agreeable to allowing a copy of the bank statement to go to a financial or professional advisor or a trusted family member. Because in that way, a second pair of eyes will be able to immediately realize that something is going on. We could have stopped that withdrawal of $300 every day within the first month had this been in place. So consider bringing that into your situation. As a prosecutor, I look at a bank statement, and I can tell immediately if this person is the victim of financial elder abuse. You look for those repeated withdrawals. And of course, what is the suspect doing? They are taking the money out of some unusual locations. Sometimes they are in a casino withdrawing the money. Sometimes they are in various different convenience stores withdrawing the money. And then thirdly, always look for those returned checks that come with a bank statement, because it's amazing how often checks are forged by somebody close to the victim, a family member, a caregiver, the gardener, whoever it is. Tip number 9, many elders are homeowners, and they're concerned about the repairs that are required to be done on their home before they die and before the house gets passed on to an adult child. I am finding out that a lot of my victims are victims of home repair scams. Please do not assume that the friendly handyman who is working down the street is licensed and bonded and qualified to do the job that you're looking to be done. Maybe it's a roof repair. Maybe it's cementing a driveway. Maybe it's a painting job. Always check with your local Better Business Bureau. Ask them, have you had any complaints about this person? Your state where you live may require that contractor to be licensed. In California, every contractor who does work over $500 has to have a state license with a number. When hiring a contractor, please get at least 3 estimates. And in California, and it may be a good rule for other states too, don't pay more than 10% or $1,000, whichever is less, up front. Because the problem is these crooked contractors, they demand a high amount up front as a deposit. And then once they've got your money, they will disappear. We always want the homeowner to get a written contract and make sure that as the work is progressing or not progressing, that you take photographs. because then it's so much easier for someone like me to prosecute the case and prove through the evidence that this person stole from the elderly homeowner. This case I prosecuted about 18 months ago. The crooked contractor placed this flyer on the windshields of various cars in a church parking lot in San Diego on a Sunday morning. Now, he avoided placing the flyer on an Austin Mini Cooper, on a VW Jetta, and on that Ford Expedition. But he always would place it on the Buick and on the Cadillac de Seville of 1994, because he knew that those cars would be owned by elderly homeowners. Elderly homeowner would come out of church, would look at this flyer on the windshield, and would be immediately drawn to it. And you can tell why. There's patriotic symbols, there's scripture, there's an offer of discounts. He calls himself Father and Daughters Christian Construction Company. And he says this slogan, "We will do anything from cleaning a toilet to building a house." Well, the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is that right now, this contractor, I believe, is cleaning a toilet. It's in the California State Penitentiary. But what he would do was, he would promise to do such good work for these people. This is an example of a contract that he drew up with one of my victims. He writes it in handwriting. He puts in what he's going to do. He only asks for a deposit up front of about $600. But then he asks for $100 in your name charity of your choice. Very strange. Have you ever had a contractor ask for $100 to be donated to a charity? The charity that he was asking her to donate it to was his own retirement fund. But look at what he's going to do it for. He never actually says in this contract how much the final price is. All he says is pay in full at completion. And he says just work with me. I look down in this contract and I see that he offers not a lifetime warranty, he offers a lifetime warranty. I'm sorry, I'm full of cynicism again, but I think of my mother's talk to me. If ever you see a spelling mistake, it was written by a crook. This man took the money up front, $700. He then did some work. He came back later that afternoon with 3 of his colleagues. They're in the kitchen, and they say to the lady, "Get your checkbook and give us the balance." She's expecting possibly another $200. He asks for $4,200. She's shocked. She cannot believe it. But here she is in a kitchen with 4 men. She's intimidated. She's afraid. What does she do? She writes out a check for $4,200. He takes the check to the bank. His 3 colleagues stay there with her. He's insisting upon cash from the bank. The bank gets nervous. They call my victim. "Do you really want us to cash this check?" And here she is in a kitchen with 3 men, and she's afraid, and she says, "Cash the check." So these are kinds of situations that will occur, and we need to be aware of them. Same fella, in fact, when I prosecuted him, he got out on bail, and would you believe it, he changed his name from Father and Daughters Christian Construction Company to Guardian Angels Mother and Daughters Construction Company, as if he thought that that would keep him under the radar. I'm showing you now examples of what I call crime scenes. These are examples of where a contractor has taken money from an elderly homeowner and then abandoned the project. These contractors are brilliant at knocking things down, but they are useless at putting things up. Here's another contractor who abandoned the project a quarter of the way through, taking the money with him. These are crimes. This is financial elder abuse, and this needs to be reported and prosecuted.